KTN News.
Situation where we in Kenya are leading on this continent on the population of our young people who are involved in betting. 76% of our young people, 76% of our young people are involved in one form of betting or the other. Some of you here are parents and family people. What are we raising our children to do? What kind of country are we building? Are we raising our children and telling them, just do nothing with your life, just go around betting and become a millionaire and live well? Is that the kind of thing that we are telling our country and our children? And then you have the statistics, check the figures. What even saddens me is that when you look at the betting regime in the country, and the figures are here, the board is here with you, 54% of those who are actively involved in betting are all from the low-income earning bracket.
All right, trying to adjust that. 76% of young men and women in Kenya are involved in betting. So that is the big story that we're focusing on this evening. So tonight, Interior Cabinet Secretary Dr. Fred Matiang'i has given betting firms until July 1st to be tax compliant or risk losing their licenses. The Betting Control and Licensing Board will ensure that betting firms have complied with the directive to avoid obstruction. According to Matiang'i, 76% of young people, as you heard there, are involved in betting. 54% of people actively involved in betting are low-income earners, and over 500,000 youth have been blacklisted by lending agencies. So if these figures are anything to go by, then clearly we have become a betting nation. But how did we get here? And what are the long-term effects of youth engaging or getting hooked to gambling? This is the big story this evening. So allow me to bring in our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna. Sophia, good evening. Just listening into the CS, and he was giving those facts and figures, basically just mentioning that 5 young men have been blacklisted from borrowing. And this is some quote-unquote a curse of some sort to the young generation in this country. Sophia.
Good evening, Linda. So that betting is a craze in Kenya is undeniable. And as a sporting and betting companies are making and raking millions of shillings in profits, there is growing concern on the adverse effects this is having on some Kenyans. Just earlier today, we had CS Interior, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, talking about 76% of Kenyans being engaged in sports betting. Of this, 55% are low-income earners. And of course, there's also that number you mentioned earlier, 500,000 of these youth have been blacklisted by financial institutions. And this is because most of them will spend all of their money betting, but will not pay up. And so they're in the red. Let's talk a little bit more about this with an industry player. One of the biggest firms, and as far as betting is concerned in the country, is SportsPesa. I have the CEO with me, Mr. Karauri. Thank you so much for making time for KTN News. Let's begin with those numbers. When we hear 76% of youth engaged in betting, and Kenya is largely a youthful nation, that sounds significant and huge. Can you paint for us a picture of the numbers in your experience from your business every day that you're dealing with?
Of course, when the Cabinet Secretary mentioned the percentage of the youth that he believes are participating in betting, it's a concern for all of us because as a Kenyan myself, and I've got kids myself, of course the well-being of our youth is a big priority for us. So what we do, we have industry-based standards in terms of responsible betting because the concern where it might come is in terms of people who are responsible and people who are not responsible. So what the CS has done is welcomed us as stakeholders to participate in the regulation-making process because if the regulations are right, then everybody benefits. The country, the the people themselves and the operators as well. Yeah.
One of the other things he was talking about, and we also heard from the speakers, the stakeholders, is that per day you have around 100 million Kenyans, either through mobile, online, engaging in betting. Is that a fact that every day as sportsperson, from your data records, you can tell that this is the kind of interaction they're having when it comes to betting?
Yeah, so for us, since we are purely an online business, we have all the numbers. And I think the biggest misconception we have, and it's with the general public, it's with government, and I think with the engagement with the CS right now, we'll be able to clarify all those issues. The biggest issue, because you also mentioned a figure of 200 billion in terms of revenue in our industry, and this figure comes from the measurement of the total deposits we get. I'll just give you an example so that you understand. For example, if you were to consider all deposits into a bank as their revenue, you'll probably be having banks registering revenues in the trillions. But of course, how they get their revenues from the charges they place on those deposits. So what we have as a 200 billion is actually the number of stakes which are placed, and our payouts are approximately 90% of the deposits. So the 10% that remains is usually what is our revenue. So there's a misconception that that tax that we pay, because that's what he said, is too little for the amount of revenue we get. But that's where the numbers go wrong. For SportPesa, if we get 1 million bets a day, which is I think approximately the maximum we get, that's usually the maximum, 1 million bets a day, and that will probably be on a weekend with a lot of games.
Okay. Yeah. 1 million bets a day, that would mean how many people? A million people getting into this per day. Is it mostly online or mobile? Which is technically?
Yes, it's probably on mobile. It'll be 1 million bets. Some people do repeated bets. So we actually have to again go and check how many are actually the unique bets that have been placed.
Yes.
So if you look at those figures, they're not as high as people think, but that's the reality.
Yeah. Because he's talked about July the 1st, all betting companies, their licenses will stand suspended pending compliance, tax compliance. Are you concerned about that?
I'm not concerned at all, because it's actually quite refreshing that the CS has seen us. As you mentioned, this is the first time the minister in our industry has actually come to talk to us as stakeholders. I'm looking forward to our next meeting. I'm not concerned at all, because we've already been recognized twice as very good taxpayers. We've been very compliant with our taxes. And I think it will actually rein in the rogue players in the industry and probably give rise to better regulation, and that's good for everyone. So for me, it's actually a good step, because again, Matiang'i wants to include us in the consultations and coming up with the new bills and regulations. And if we adopt best practice in the world, it'll be a win for everybody. Yeah.
So let's talk about the concerns, because the PS talked about suicides that are being registered, families that are breaking down, school fees all used in betting, money meant for the livelihood of a family. When you see that, so that on one hand you're engaging in business, you're making your profits, but on the other hand, the adverse effects it's having on society. Away from what the players, including the CS and all others, will come to propose in as far as regulations are concerned, as SportsPesa, what do you see needs to be done to ensure that you're just not making money for money's sake, but there's ethics in business that protects the livelihoods of Kenyans?
So that's a good question, because as I said, as SportPesa, we are at the forefront of responsible gaming, and that is actually what controls, because at the end of the day, betting has existed in Kenya since the 1960s. It's existed in the world for over 100 years. So what we do is adopt best practices from those countries and ensure that that control exists. And as I said, this first step by Matiang'i is what will take us there, because the government so far has been focusing only on taxation as opposed to pushing for regulation, which us as SportPesa, we have actually been pushing for. If we get the regulation right, we'll not be getting any incidents of irresponsible gaming. And again, when we talk about suicides and all those other issues, we've actually had some incidents where we've checked, and most of the time, because of the rise of the gaming industry, there are a lot of false reports. We would like to just check and ensure that those ones are true. But regulation is actually the key, because at the end of the day, if government ensures that all gaming is done in regulated establishments, then you will have more control. It's very difficult to control it if you ever either take it underground due to heavy taxation or doing a complete ban, then that way you're not going to be able to control or regulate the industry at all. Yeah.
Because we have a board, licensing board, betting licenses board that many would say, first, we've never heard what they're doing. I wonder what you make of their role so far in ensuring this regulation. But as you speak to that, you look at industries like tobacco, because of the adverse effects, cancer and all that, in their packaging of cigarettes, you have this warning, disclaimer. Do you think because everywhere around the country now, billboards on television, ads on betting, we've become inundated with this. Do we need to have more disclaimers at a personal level or business level for SportsPesa and others to say perhaps there needs to be disclaimers so that people don't think, because there are more losers than there are winners when it comes to betting. That's a fact, isn't it?
Yes. So, in fact, this is a discussion we've had before. And as I said, Betting Control and Licensing Board, again, we have not been focusing on regulation, we've been focusing on taxation. And you're right, there needs to be some control. Because what has happened, SportPesa came, a lot of players have come into the industry since then. And in as far as we are responsible, we cannot guarantee the responsibility of other players in the industry. So definitely it's a bit out of control in terms of the messaging in the commercials and how often those commercials come onto the media, and that actually does need to be controlled. But again, it needs to be a consultative process which will involve stakeholders in coming up with regulations to control that,
Would there be something like a disclaimer of sorts that you would say this would work for people to know that this is not a job, because there are those youth who've resorted to it as a daily source of income generation. How for you would you propose, for instance, to go about it?
Personally, I've actually mentioned it several times that people should stop. It's a purely entertainment. And I think what should happen, in fact, I encourage the media, because that's where you come in. Because the disclaimers we do have in all our ads, we always put disclaimers about above, no underage gambling and all that. But then at the end of the day, in terms of the statistics, I think the media should actually come on board and play their role, because the statistics are there in terms of knowing how many winners are there. And the sectors are quite different. In betting, we do have a lot of winners. Because it's different from lottery, where you just buy a ticket and wait to win. In sports betting, people use their knowledge at least to analyze games. So they lose, win. It's very different. I think I can give you more details of the whole subsector if you invite me again another time. But it's quite different, so it depends on what type of gaming you're focusing on. If either it's lottery, casino, or sports betting, because the winning rates are different, the chances of winning are completely different, and then that would vary depending on what you're advertising.
How would you say, at the end of the day, your industry with betting, you're making money, but on the other hand, CSR, because it's something also the CS touched on today and said there's a lot of money being made, but in terms of giving back, some of the betting companies will purely just do PR work, t-shirts here and there, but as far as sponsoring real causes and growing sports in Kenya, you're involved with international teams, but locally, what more can we do?
Yeah, in fact, I just wanted to give a figure, because like for 2018, the amount of tax from SportPesa as a company to be paid will be 4.7 billion. This is under a backdrop of earnings before tax of 4 billion shillings. So what that tells you, even though our earnings before tax are 4 billion, we are paying 4.7 billion in taxes. This is because the 15% tax on our gaming revenue comes before our expenses. Then we still pay our corporate tax of at 30% like any other company. So we end up paying more than even we retain as earnings. That aside, remember as SportPesa also we are doing a lot of CSR. And that's why I'm saying in terms of regulation, it needs to align all companies, because as SportPesa, we are the ones who do so much. I think as licensed sports betting operators in the country, we are approaching 50. I don't know what the others are doing. And I think that's what the Cabinet Secretary was alluding to. So we do need to align and ensure everybody else is as responsible, and so that that giving back, even though for us as SportPesa it's our passion and that's why we do it, we need more of the companies to also to act responsibly as corporates.
And then there's the concern on banning. Uganda has banned betting, and there are those who say Kenya should follow suit. And in fact, when the government reversed itself on the higher taxation that it had imposed, there was hue and cry that why they're earning so much money, then they should pay up a little bit more. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and that's why I said there needs to be a very delicate balance, because the government's role in our industry is first to ensure they channel all the gaming through established licensed operators, and secondly, they can to ensure they collect as much tax as they can as revenue. Now, you have to balance the two so that in terms of raising taxes, you don't take them to a level where now people start gaming in underground establishments or on offshore sites, which are already advertising in Kenya. And remember, with the way mobile money is going, we'll not be able to control where people send their money. So when people talk about banning or raising taxes to a level that is not sustainable, never before seen anywhere in the world, it's going to create a different industry, which will be completely out of control, and to me will do more harm than good.
Yeah. Finally, back to the question of our youth, and you spoke about, underage individuals should not engage in betting, but how do we know they're not? How do you ensure that you're weeding out these kids that would go in there and bet? As we stand now, there is no real way to tell the numbers or in what kind of fashion it's having impact on them. So again, to that question, because that's the biggest concern across the board, that many of the youth, instead of engaging on, whether it's employment, and the government, of course, has a role to play in that, in creating that environment. But for you, how do we just ensure it's the people who know what they're doing, know the implication of the same, that are getting involved in betting?
Yeah, and to this I'll say, because it's a question that has come up before, what happens, remember we are online gaming platform, and for you to register on our platform, you have to be registered with a mobile phone, registered on M-Pesa, all that have their own know your customer requirements. And even for us now, what we're planning to do is to enhance that to another step. Right. So currently you don't have any young persons playing on online platforms, and that's why I stated there's a real need to ensure we stay on the right side of legislation, so that we don't push the industry underground. Remember when we had illegal betting shops? When you have shops where people go, then you cannot really control who comes into the establishment. But if we keep it online and we ensure that everybody comes through either mobile money or the banks, which do the know your customer requirements, even for us, we do that, but then that's like an added layer. So at the end of the day, you do not have any young people playing on our platform. And that's why it's very important to keep it regulated in the right way.
Regulated, and that's a perfect way to wind up. Ronald Karari is the CEO of SportsPesa Linda, and so critical as this conversation continues, for those who say at the end of the day, more regulation, more engagement with the stakeholders to ensure that those underground companies, as we saw in the past, do not then mushroom and take advantage when there can be engagement, when there can be regulation, so that on one hand business is going on, but those who are interested in engaging in sports betting do so, but some of these adverse effects are nipped at the bad early on, Linda.
Sophia, thank you so much. At least that's a little bit of an eye-opener of how the betting companies work. This is a conversation we're having this evening with Dr. Susan Gitau, who's a psychologist. Ma'am, it's so good to see you. It's been a while since I saw you. Welcome to The Big Story, and thank you for making time for us. We also have Zablon Matuho Lubanga. He's a betting enthusiast. And the reason why I'm excited about this is because then I can pick his mind. How do people get to a point where we are now being referred to as a betting/gambling nation? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, for being part of the story. But the big story this evening is not just about us here in the studio. I want Kenyans out there to be part of this conversation, because I know someone who within the family is a betting enthusiast, is addicted to betting. So this is a problem that even parents are raising. You have children not looking for every coin everywhere, from every corner in the house, just so that they can be part of betting. So Ajiroba says 97% of the statistics are made on the spot. Ask Matiang'i, who did the research, and how they came to that conclusion of 76% of the youth. Stanley Msake says, of 76% youth, how many left meaningful, well-paying jobs in favor of betting? He's basically saying the youth have no other alternative apart from this. At Cassava Ambassador says, we as Cassava Ambassadors have enough food we can supply countrywide, but we don't have the support from the government. Trust me, Kenya will be food secure in Kenya. Issues with gambling is not the main agenda. Big four agenda in food security is. Oh God, I wish you knew how big this is. Nicola says, joblessness leads to all this. Give youth jobs and you will not see any bit of it. Finally, Cheruna says, Matiang'i should consider the same betting companies sponsored some clubs, Kenyan clubs, where our youth are playing during their time. And he actually alluded to this, part of the CSR programs that they have, some of the betting companies have. So, Zablon, allow me to begin with you. You're a betting enthusiast. How did you get there? How did you start?
Actually, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I started betting while I was still joining my campus. That was in May 2012. By then, there were some lottery games that we used to play. But now you see, at times you turn out to be lucky and then you get a win, and then you try it again and then you get a win. But now that does not mean you end up doing that as a full-time practice. But at the end of the day, there's some brighter perspective of this betting issue, because at the end of the day, you end up making something not as much as expected, but at least you end up making something that you have made illegally other than in other ways. So since then, in 2012, when I started that, while I was still in campus, just to get something to at least boost my survival at campus. But then actually after graduation and after I've finished campus, I started doing my own things. But still, I do betting for fun. I do it. Yes.
I need you
Yes.
to take me step by step, because
Yes.
we have parents out there who
Yes.
are also listening.
Yes.
I need them to understand from
Yes.
what point does someone start betting to a point where it becomes an addiction. How
Okay.
old were you? Where were you getting money to bet? What
Yes.
kept you going?
Yeah. Okay. By 2012, I was 20 by then. I was 20 years old. Now, where I used to get my money for betting and playing the lottery is from the little pocket money that I was being given. But at times you see there are some financial constraints while you are in school. The money that you have, at times it doesn't seem to be enough, and then the parents at home, they are not in a position to add on what you have. So you are trying to look for an alternative. Remember, by this time you are having full-time classes. You are having classes from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Now it's not as easy as people may think to get a part-time job, but at the end of the day you have expenses that need to be sorted. You call home, they tell you that we don't have money for now. So you need to find ways where you can get you can get some money other than from your parents, because when they say they don't have money, you cannot force them to give you money. You cannot go on stealing or doing crime just to get money. But you see, when you play games, lottery games, the gambling, there are also virtual games, at least you can end up getting something, even if it's not as much as expected, but something that to keep you going for quite some time, until the parents again send you something for your upkeep and other personal effects.
Zablon, so listening into you, you must have made a few coins.
Yes.
So what happened on the days that you did not manage to make these few coins? The reason I'm asking this is because we have a report on the rate of suicide in the country, and a good number of them are being attributed to this betting craze that's in the country.
Actually, it's not, every day is not Christmas, you know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, every day is not Christmas. At times you get, at times you don't get. But now it depends with the mindset that you have while getting into this thing in the first place. Because when you start betting, it's not a surety that you are going to win. That is something you have to understand, number one. So when you don't win, you count it as a bad day in business, as any other business. You make profits and at times you make a loss. So when you don't make a win that time, you count yourself that day business did not go well for you, and you hope for the best next time.
I love how you say it. Business did not go well, and it's not a good day, so you try and see if maybe you'll be lucky the next day. Daktari, so just listening into Zablon, he started this when he was in school, and he says his parents didn't have enough money. So, I mean, this was that extra activity he would engage in to get his money, and he says when he didn't get it, I mean, like he would look at it as a bad day. We're not in a good place, Doc, are we?
We are not, actually. We are not. And Zablon is just being honest, because there are so many youths out there, not the ones in college. We also have the ones that are not in college. And poverty levels, for sure. I think in Kenya we don't have to hide this anymore. So we do have some youths who get into betting because of poverty issues, just like Zablon. But we do have others. It's a trend. And for sure, even when I was getting here, you know, the biggest billboard here is betting. Yeah? And what happens at the end of the day? You will find so many young people, and especially at the university. As much as Zablon is telling you they have 8 to 5, there are those who Skype lectures. actually to just go into their rooms and bet.
Yeah.
We also have youths today, the only people that they see as role models that have made it as actually our artists or celebs, as we call them. And you find that somebody sees there is an easy way to make money. We have also seen our leaders, sorry to say this, somebody sees that if I get affiliated or I get close to a political leader, I will also have quick money. And the idea and the mentality that you don't have to work so hard, you don't have to finish school to be rich, I can bet, I can gamble, actually has become a trend in Kenya. And it's so sad because most of the young people that get into betting or gambling, which we call non-chemical addiction, you realize they do not know later on what they are getting themselves into. And becomes very, very severe when you are now addicted. You can't hold yourself anymore. You cannot get to a level of saying no to this betting. And as Zablon said, he gave it just his own experience. But from a psychological point of view, there is no difference between gambling as an addiction and alcohol and drug abuse addiction, because the cycle is the same. It's the first time that the Zablon has said you bet and you win, so it excites you to go to the next phase, just like an alcoholic or an addict of any other sort of drug. You realize the first phase is excitement. You're so excited, oh, I have put my 50 bob, I've gotten myself 500. And so you're actually tempted to go back. And when you go back, you put more money to have the same feeling that you had the first time. So you put 500 instead of 50, you go on increasing 1,000, and I don't know, even the betting companies are in business. Just like Zablon said, sometimes the business is not so good.
Yeah.
Even then they're in business, so when you win so much, they also don't want to lose. So they will also do their mathematics.
So they will balance.
Oh yes, they will balance the books. And then the next phase that you get into is tolerance. So you kind of bet more money without feeling it, by the way. Maybe the first time Zablon put his 50 bob, 100, he felt it.
Doc,
but yes?
Doc, hold on. I need us to stay on tolerance. I need to take a break, but when we come back, we can pick up from that bit. And I like the way you're saying, he says, yes. Zablon said they were in class. I remember a classmate would have a laptop like this with his phone here.
Oh, yes.
So the lecturer is here and he's very busy betting. Sure. All right, people, we're taking a break. We'll be back on The Big Story. Stay with us.